This conference will now be recorded.
So hopefully everybody's doing okay, given the circumstances of COVID and possibly working, from home in other safe areas. But we really wanted to thank you so much for joining the call today. We value your participation and your involvement in FARA, and one of the goals is to, I think I'm going to have to mute everybody. Sorry, one second. Sharing. Sharing. Okay. You guys still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks again for joining the meeting today. It's more than just the once, membership meeting that you can participate. We're always looking for new ideas and new faces to join. We have various committees that you can get involved with, such as membership, trainings and communications, and the symposium. And let us know what you'd like to help with. Sorry, this thing keeps telling me that people are getting muted. This is very strange. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So today there are two different parts to the training. The first part, we're going to start with answering tough questions. And then the second part, I'm going to hand it over to Sherry Cooey, where she's going to talk to you about becoming certifiable with the CAM exam. So I don't know about you, but I think many of us wear many different hats in our positions, and we're constantly learning new things. I mean, if you would have told me 10 years ago that I would have been asked some of the questions that I've been over my tenure, I wouldn't have believed it. But I don't think that there are any easy questions these days. It seems to get more technical and intricate as the time goes on. So today we're going to talk about some of the questions that have come up over the years that some of our members have faced. And at the end, we want you to participate, and we encourage you to submit your own questions so that we can get your feedback. I mean, one of the best things about FARA is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are so many people that have had way more experience than some of us, and the chances are that they probably know best practice on how to handle something. So maybe you guys can relate. How many of you have heard this one? This wasn't a false alarm because someone actually tried to open the door. We have video of a person trying to open the door in the middle of the night. So why is this a false alarm? Have you experienced this before?
100 times.
And one of the best classes that I think that I was able to attend was when Brad, who also manages Maryland Burg and Fire Alarm Association, they actually have an alarm technician class that's pretty elaborate, that specifically outlines all the mechanics and components of an alarm system. So I remember probably in my first month of somebody asking me this, and I had no idea how to answer the question, because when you come into your, your employment here, you get, GOs and SOPs on how to do your job, but they don't tell you all these little intricate questions that are going to come up along the way. So by taking a class and educating yourself and getting involved with the industry, you know exactly that, you know, the contact should fit securely and the door shouldn't have that much give before the alarm would sound. Does anyone else have a similar experience, and how did you handle it?
You know, this is Duff from Sandy City Police. You're dead on, but the other thing I tell them is that a properly installed system won't do that. And there are wide gap contacts. You can move the contact down more towards the hinge so the door has to open further. There's just lots of things you can do to prevent that from happening, but the alarm should not go off unless the door is open more than just rattling. So I've had success with that. No one seems to complain much after you explain it to them.
Yeah, I've also had issues mostly with commercial establishments when they talk about the give on doors, that drunks are pulling on them in the middle of the night, or that there was some winds or some kind of storm system passing through and they knew that there was play in the door. I'm like, well, then you either need to move the contact or fix the door.
Or do any of you have historic properties in your areas where, you know, you can tell during the extreme heat and, you know, vice versa, the very cold, of the doors swelling, which, you know, impacts the integrity of the system as well? I see that a lot, especially right now with how hot it's been here in Maryland. So I don't know if you all have that. And I get a lot of feedback on, well, we can't do this because it's in the HPC and I have to do this, but you know, there are requirements. If you do have an historic property in downtown, you can't just do whatever. And you know, most of the times when you're changing the outside and any kind of adding to the structure of the outside of the building, it does require HPC approval. And more than not, these folks haven't even gained the approval from HPC to be having these systems on the outside of their property anyways. So they're in violation of that land management code. So I don't know if you guys have that at all, but that's something that we have, that does happen here as well. Any other discussion on this question? Do we want to dive in further, or? And this is an interactive kind of thing. So you can either verbally talk or you can put your question in the chat so that we make sure that we can get you where you need to be with this question. All right, I'll take that as a no. We'll move on. We have video of someone on our property. They were inside the fenced area looking around, but they never tried to get inside the building. So why is this a false alarm? It's a tricky question. I would probably ask them, how did they get into your fence? If you have a good fence, and I do a lot of SEPTED stuff as well, where I'm going out to the properties and giving recommendations on, you know, how to target harden and all that good stuff. And a lot of times their fence, they're not very good to begin with. There is some kind of deficit in there, and it's not really helpful to what they think, you know, their end goal is. Obviously, if they have an alarm system, they're concerned about their safety and they're protecting their assets, but then they have the crappiest fence in the world that isn't going to deter anything. So why do they have the fence up? So it's kind of a twofold question as to why, you know, they're asking that in the first place. Have you all had that in your area?
I have a funny situation. When I first started working for the county 18 years ago, we had this outdoor supply, they sold like John Deere equipment, and they had an electronic fence that was censored. And this was the biggest issue I had walking into, you know, the first month on the job. And of course, Deere would set off this alarm, and it went on for probably 6 or 7 months. And finally, the answer to their situation, believe it or not, was getting guard dogs. And just by doing that, it solved the issue, and we don't even hear from them anymore. But we have a lot of issues with fences that are being monitored, and we kind of have to talk the citizen out of removing that type of alarm system, because they are terrible with many, many false alarms, especially in our area with wildlife.
So what we normally do when we have a situation like that is, because for those of you who don't know, Sandy Springs, we have a verified response ordinance. You have to have video or some kind of other evidence before we'll even respond. And we kind of take the position of the reasonableness standard. If a person were on the property doing business, or if it's a residence, if they were doing things at home, and they were to look outside and see what the camera sees, would it have been reasonable for them to call 911? Would the police officer have gotten mad and called that an unreasonable request or not? So if somebody says, yeah, we saw him on the camera, he's on our property, even though he didn't break into the building, like a car dealership, for example, that's not unreasonable to call the police when you see a human being on the property at times outside of business hours. So we generally will waive that false alarm fee. But if it's just somebody walking down the street on the sidewalk and it happens to set off their cameras, yeah, that's a false alarm. You didn't do a very good job of looking at the video and determining, was that guy being suspicious, or was he just walking down the street? So that's the way we handle those.
Hey, Meredith, before we go further, we're still seeing your slide number 1 on our screens. Is there?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Okay.
Can you see anything now?
Still number 1.
Maybe try to take away the presentation and then bring it back up.
Yeah, maybe we're buffering something. There we go. Maybe just go down, hit the, yeah, okay. There you go.
Damn it. There we go. You can still see it?
Yeah, we're seeing the slide now.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know why that happened. I was definitely on the slide. Gotta love the technology. This is my first rodeo here, and I'm not gonna lie, I haven't been the greatest at these Teams and go-to meetings during COVID, so bear with me.
Well, points, you got your head perfectly aligned between the butterflies, so
Yeah.
points for that.
And the gentleman that was just talking about the suspicious person and just calling in, down the sidewalk, and there's been a lot of discussion on, the data and the video clips that the alarm company and the monitoring company can get, and a lot of them are by the alarm user. So what I'm hearing is a lot of the companies are, at the mercy of getting the video clips from the customer for those agencies that are set up to PSAP to ASAP, and accepting the video clips in their 911 call center. So, there's a lot of on the dispatcher to try to make information when all they're doing is saying, I see, giving a description of what they actually see, and then transferring information and then getting that over to the customer for them to on what they would like to do. So there's a lot of information on how we're going to handle this kind of thing in the future.
Well, so what we do is we give the police officers discretion when they get to the call. And when they go respond to the call, if they think it's unreasonable, they'll pull in their disposition code in the dispatch system. Will be a code that tells that they get fined for a false alarm. And if the police officer arrives and thinks it's reasonable request for police service, then the officer can use a different disposition code, and that alarm won't generate a false alarm fine. But we put the onus on the alarm company. It's your responsibility as the alarm company, whether you're working with your customer or your monitoring center or whomever, it's your job to decide if it's a reasonable request for police service, not ours. And if you call us and you fit our criteria to be eligible for dispatch, and we go out there and we find that it was unreasonable, we'll fine you. You can appeal it, and then we'll talk about it further. But we put the onus on the alarm company. Do it however you want to do it. It's your private company, you do it the way you want, but don't call us unless you've got a reasonable expectation that there's something suspicious going on.
Make sure that we are muted unless we're asking a question or we're talking, because I get a lot of background noise from somebody, and I don't want to have to mute everyone, because that's my only option. Is if I mute everyone, then we don't get to have this dialogue. So I don't want to do that. I want everyone to be able to speak freely, but just please make sure that when you're not talking or have a question that you are muted. Thank you very much. Did anybody else have anything to add to the question and how you handle it in your jurisdiction? No? All right, we'll move on. I love this one. My door was unlocked and my alarm was set. A female opened our door to our house instead of the next door's neighbor's house. How is this my fault? I mean, this is addressed through a lot of our bulletins that you can find on our website. Direct the alarm on there as well. But from your system, you know, locking your doors and windows. Everything needs to be tightly fitted and secured, because the system did do what it was supposed to do here, but you just opened the door.
You know, I've had people call me and say, hey, I live in a good community. I shouldn't have to lock my doors, but I want to arm my alarm system. And first of all, that makes zero sense. The second thing is I explained to them an alarm system does not make a non-secure environment secure, and that they need it. You know, the alarm works in conjunction with your locks. You gotta lock your door. You can't expect the alarm to keep people out. If you want the alarm to let you know that someone came in, then just do the chime feature or something like that and don't arm it. And most of the time when you talk people through it, they understand, but you get those choice ones that just want to be stubborn and don't understand.
And that's true. And then a lot of the times you can ask them if they're willing to file a police report. We've had, you know, people where they've gotten drunk and, you know, stumbled into the wrong part of the house and they've called it into something else, and then they want to claim that it wasn't a false alarm. But we have it, you know, on video. They're trying to say that there was an issue when there really wasn't. It was just, you know, a user error. It's kind of like the same thing. If you're willing to press charges against the person or file a trespass order, then, you know, that's one thing. But a lot of times they're not willing to do that. Welcome, Courtney. Anybody else have any funny stories about something similar to not locking their doors? I'm sure we've all heard it.
Can I respond quickly to Rachel Sears's message in the chat about the fining?
Yeah, I did not see that. Go ahead.
Okay, just briefly, I believe Texas and Tennessee, Ohio, and a couple other states have a state law that says you cannot fine alarm companies. Georgia, we do not have that law. We decided that we would change the way we looked at it. And we said, if we had a person calling 911 constantly and it was never a legitimate police matter, what would we do with that individual? Well, we would fine them or cut them off or some other such thing. We might even charge them with a crime, depending on the circumstance. So it follows that the alarm companies are the ones making the phone call to the police, not the alarm user. And that the alarm company is the one that can monitor the alarm. They're the ones who can fix it, install it, repair it, maintain it, whatnot. So we passed an ordinance that said, well, we'll fine the alarm company. They're the ones who called us and made the false call. We don't care if they pass that on to their customer or not. And subsequently, the alarm companies sued us, and it went to federal court, and we won. And the federal court came back and they said that is a legitimate governmental concern to reduce false alarms, and that's a legitimate way to accomplish the goal is finding the alarm companies. So in case any of your jurisdictions are thinking about that, it's tested through ours, and we'll be glad to share anything we've got. But essentially holding the alarm companies accountable, it really makes them mad, but we overcame that, and I've gone from 230 alarms per week, and now I get about 20 alarms per week. So we've gotten the alarm company's attention, and it was that in combination with the verified response requirements. But anyway, for Rachel, I hope that answers your question.
Did anybody have anything to add or comment on that? And I'm getting feedback that you guys are still not seeing my slides. Are you seeing a ghost in this slide?
Yeah, I'm seeing slide 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I know I'm not the only one who has heard that it's not my fault, it's someone else's fault. And I'm sure the excuses are endless that we've heard. I'm going to jump around here because I really want to hear about this one, about how it was my pool table's fault. And I think that Sherry Hurd has a pretty good story about that.
What was it, Sherry Cooey, you mean?
Or is it Sherry Cooey? I'm pretty sure it was a Sherry.
It wasn't me. I'm sure I could pull some stories out, but that's not one of them.
I could have swore that somebody had a story about how they removed their pool table from the inside of their establishment and put it outside, and it somehow managed to set off the motion sensor, or
Tammy. It was Tammy, I think.
oh, sorry, Tammy.
Yes.
Something crazy.
Yeah,
like
it was actually, it was a pawn business next door had taken the pool table out and set it in front of the next business over, and they're claiming that someone pushed it up against their window, but it set off their front door detector, and they still have not paid me to this day.
I can say I've never heard that one before, but it's pretty original. So I love this one. You know, I wasn't at home. It's not my fault. You know, surely it was something that the alarm company did, or, you know, how many times have you seen a low battery signal that's resulted in a dispatch? That's my pet peeve, because it should never happen, and yet it continues to do so. And this is all when you're listening to the customer, of course, you have that customer service component that goes in because, you know, you are in public service. So here, you know, I'm very empathetic. Thank you for contacting the department. Please share with me your feedback, and then we kind of go from there. And I get into these, it's not my fault stuff all the time. And it's kind of crazy and ridiculous at the same time because, you know, right now, and I'm going to dive into the rabbit's hole for a second to talk about the state of affairs that policing is in right now, because it's under, you know, critical scrutiny, if you will. So there is an extra onus on having to explain everything literally to customers when they're calling in, and being empathetic and sympathetic to the fact that they are, you know, a citizen who are, you know, paying taxes, if you will. So, you know, usually I start by just letting them talk and letting them point out whatever they think it is. Usually if I'm getting feedback, especially with COVID, I'm not working in the office all the time. So I'm able to kind of get ahead of these questions before they really arise. So I do my research. I'm pulling the call for service. I'm checking CAD to see if there were any special notes, because sometimes, I don't know if you're aware of it, we have a CAD system here, as all of you do probably, where I don't always have access to specific information because I'm not on the dispatching end of things. So sometimes there's notes in there that don't carry over if people are ID'd. So I'll start the investigation by reaching out to the communications manager if I know it's going to go that route. And if you've been doing this long enough, you kind of get the feeling of if somebody's going to make a big stink about something. So I kind of already have my investigation lined up. And sometimes I contact the alarm company just to see if perhaps that they had service and they remedied whatever their issues were. So, you know, I do recognize that people are unemployed right now, and it's a very difficult time for people, and money is tight. And right now our mayor has extended the due date for all fines 30 days beyond of whenever the state of emergency ends. So, you know, you deal with all of that, and then that way you have all of your information to get back to them. So some of these questions that they or these excuses that they come up with don't even make any sense. And you're able to kind of, you know, answer it with a dignified response because you've already done your investigation and that. And you might not have all the time to do that, but I take pride in my work, and I'm very articulate in my responses. And I have a cry wolf-based system here where when I'm getting these questions, I'm putting the context of the emails and I'm copying and I'm pasting it in the notes section so that if these patterns keep emerging, I can say, hey, I talked to you on this date and this time. This was the issue that you reported. You know, no action was taken by you. Your alarm company couldn't get a hold of you, and they've been trying to work with you on getting that bad, you know, sensor fixed. So that's food for thought. I'm sure we've had all of these issues arise in our own neck of the woods. Did anybody have a specific example that they'd like to share, and as it relates to it's not my fault or user error?
My favorite one, which resulted in several $1,000s in fines for a residential location that ended up going to court 2 years later, started out as it's not my fault because the air pressure changes in the house and it set the alarm off. And then that resulted in back and forth with her over air pressure is not going to set it off. Then it turned into, well, I'm not paying it. We went through our process of denying police response and going through the county attorney for collections. Then it went to her desire to do a payment plan. So after 2 payments and multiple additional false alarms, which then raised the balance due higher, went back into denied response, and was one of the most enjoyed conversations of my colleagues that I had with her when she called to request another payment plan. And I asked her how much she would feel comfortable paying each month, and she told me nothing. I said, okay, well, that's not a payment plan. And then we kind of went round and round. I said, okay, we're just going to go the round of the county attorney for collections. And she said, okay, well, I'll pay $10 a month on a $2,000 fine. I said, we're not a bank either. We're not doing 17 years. So we'll go back to the drawing board. So it ended up going to court, and we had trouble serving her because she was constantly abroad, although she said she was unemployed for 2 years. So she ended up having a judgment against her, didn't go to court with us, although I had all of the documentation about her claiming that the air pressure changing set her alarm off, and she ended up paying the fines in the end. But some of our people will dig deep. That was one of the two of my favorites. The other one was this business owner for a gas station in Bethesda. They had a regular activation. I don't think it was a panic alarm activation. In the letter, he claimed that it took officers more than 45 minutes to arrive at the location, and that his employee could have been killed and left there. And, you know, he was completely upset with how the police department handled it. And the person, you know, was there for quite some time, making his employee nervous, and he slipped away into the darkness of night. His literal words on that. So I said, okay, I'm gonna, you know, investigate this. And like any other appeal that I investigate, I reached out to all of the officers involved and said, here's the CAT event. What happened on this? I have an appeal. I don't want to taint the waters with, you know, what the person wrote, and just kind of get the officer's perspective. And he's like, yeah, we got dispatched to it. I was there within 30 seconds. The employee didn't know what happened. And we said, okay, cool. And we cleared the call, the end. So it amazes me the tall tales that some people will tell in order to get out of the alarm fines.
That's true. And I mean, alarm companies have come a long way. I mean, half the battle with all of the scams that people are getting on their cell phones, because most people don't have a landline anymore, are getting, you know, the customer to answer the phone when they're trying to verify for dispatch. So at our last chapter meeting, one of the local dealers was brought up a good point about how the text feature has reduced a dispatch request like 90%, something crazy like that. And I just found that fascinating because, you know, here we are 2020, you would think that we would be a little bit farther advanced, but, you know, not every system is compatible. And sometimes people get frustrated with their alarm system, and then they keep the system because they're in the contract and they don't want to have to, you know, pay for more equipment that they already paid for. So they'll jump to a new company, but most of the time it's either user error or there truly is something wrong with the system, and they're not remedying that by just jumping companies. So when the companies do these takeovers, you know, if you read the fine print in most of them, the disclosure is right there that they're not bound by pre-existing conditions, if you will. It's like, you know, going to, you know, dealing with all that insurance stuff when you have an ailment. So, you know, I really encourage people to do their research when they're picking out a system and a company. And it seems like this one dealer is highly encouraging his customers to, you know, be able to control from his cell phone whether, you know, you press 1 for, you know, canceling and 2 for dispatch or whatever the numeric, you know, commands are for it. But that text feature, the number that texts you, never changes. So that person can save that contact in their phone, whereas we all know that sometimes with central stations, depending on the influx of weather events, some of the capacity, they require calls to get shifted over because that call center is full. So it goes over to the next one, so that number might not always be the same when they're trying to verify, and people don't answer the phone for numbers that they don't know. So I look for that to be a very positive thing for alarm coordinators. In case you haven't, it's been around for a while, apparently, but it's just getting popular among some dealers locally here. Did anybody have anything else? Or how are we doing with the chat?
There was a lot of chat still going on about finding alarm companies, but Barbara Saunders responded that she has several businesses that have installed photo beams around the properties, that they don't want to pay fines because they can't control the animals in the area. So this may go back to the other question from previous.
We had a strip mall that had photo beams on it because, unfortunately, as tenant spaces sometimes fluctuate with the market, and specifically around the recession is when we found this, an entire business space, commercial space, was cleaned out of all copper, HVAC, whatever they could go in there and steal, they did. And they didn't realize at the time, and then they went to turn something on, and it caused significant damage. So they put these photo beams on the top of the strip mall, and it wasn't until I didn't even know what a photo beam was when this happened. I didn't even know that there was such a thing. So I got the alarm company to send me a diagram because there was definitely a bad sensor, and we were able to illustrate that once we were able to get that information. And then the property manager was the point of contact that we ended up dealing with to remedy that. But sometimes it's difficult when you have a tenant and a property manager and then a property owner, because you have different layers and they don't always know what's going on with the property until you have a problem. And then it's just trying to track down who the right person is and keeping notes of names and numbers of things that you were able to resolve or things that you still need to take action on.
Meredith, I think this is analogous to when you guys were talking about alarms on unlocked doors. You shouldn't really have beams outside a fence. They should be inside the fence. So the animals should be blocked by the fence. The beam's not going to block the animal. It's going to pick the animal up when it walks through the beam. So sometimes it's that the owner has to change, add a fence or change the call list so that they're not calling the police on the fence alarms. They're calling an employee to go down and check and get rid of the animal or whatever. So
yeah, we have a problem for our vehicle recovery section that they were consistently reporting alarms, and they have 6 or 8 foot fence around the property, and it's a huge property, and the deer can clear those fences, and they're setting the alarms off. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, have 24-hour security, or, I mean, we're finding ourselves because it's for the police department. But, they were frustrated. They're like, can't we be exempt? I'm like, we're not exempt. We still are, subject to the same rules. So.
This is also where maybe cameras come in, where you can have the beam trip the camera, so you can look at the camera and see if there's something really going on.
One thing I've told some of my alarm companies is, or my registrants, is you can have, I call them speed bumps with your alarm company. So when the alarm company detects something, you can say, you need to call this number first. I'm in a resort community. Most of our alarmed properties are second homes. So if you want to be called first before they call us, I'm perfectly okay with that. That's your call, not mine. And how your alarm company deals with it is their problem, not mine. But a lot of people have said, oh, call my property management company first, because one of our most common things is the cleaners show up and they don't know the alarm, they don't know the property's alarm, they don't have the code, they forget. So putting that speed bump in has helped us a fair amount, or suggesting that speed bump. I find that takes a fair number of times when people call me and say, hey, you know, this is not my fault. I go, well, here's an alternative. And that seems to calm some folks down.
We have some input from Jordan Brown, alarm guy perspective. Add into your ordinance that an alarm company cannot dispatch authorities on photoelectric beams. We don't dispatch on them. We just call RPs, responsible parties. And then he says also authorities won't respond if customer doesn't respond. If you don't care enough to respond, why should we?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jordan. That's a very good point. Anybody have anything else on that before we move along? No? Okay. Next question. My elderly parent has Alzheimer's, dementia, or some kind of other disease or ailment, and it keeps triggering this alarm. This is not their fault. This is a tough one. At this point, I mean, hopefully the person isn't totally, I know that there's a lot of things that you can put in the home to keep the elderly at home longer because it's so expensive to put them in care. So you have the sensors that you can put under the bed, you know, and near the pill bottle, so that you can say if they're not up by a certain time, then to call a responsible party, etc. But usually by the time this is happening, there's a pattern here. And we had a lady here who this happened to, and she would file a police report every time because she was convinced that somebody was coming into her house and moving things and hiding things from her when it seemed sad, and she just couldn't remember that she had done it. So hopefully you have some kind of victim services coordinator. We used to have a program here for both that and for domestic violence victims, where it was called an AWARE alarm, and I forget what the name of the Alzheimer's program was, but it's built in, so it was a special registration, so it was be flagged in your system as automatic pop-up that this person has special considerations at the premise. This would get the dispatcher aware and help the officer respond, you know, in a different kind of way and not so accusatory. And more than not, you're probably going to work with this kind of environment because, you know, it is bound, you know, a lot of ADA stuff, and just being a good person and working with people that, you know, can't control the obvious and finding a different solution for them, such as not contacting the police, but contacting the responsible party. And sometimes they don't have that, and then it's getting a court-appointed guardian or someone that can advocate on their behalf until it's no longer safe for them to live in their home. So I don't know how you all feel, but that's kind of what we do here in Frederick. Does anybody have anything that they want to add to that or weigh in?
In Montgomery County, we have something similar. We have the crisis intervention team, and so I've called them a few times when we've had, there have been comments in the call for certain calls of, I'm just going to keep activating my alarm system because I know that there are people breaking in outside, and you know that the person is a consumer, what we refer to as the less than PC term, mentally off. We've had a few that, like you said, are the Alzheimer's that forget that they set the alarm and they go out to go get the newspaper, or that they need more time. And, you know, I've worked with those customers. If it's like, I need more time, you know, working with the alarm company to extend that time before the activation goes off because they get confused or they get overwhelmed. We had one individual who it ended up that there weren't enough comments in the call for the alarm call that was originally cleared as a false alarm, but there was another incident attached to it that her husband was having a mental snap and he was homicidal, and he ended up getting committed. So it was easily cleared for the appeal with doing the further research and finding out that there were other issues. But we're fortunate enough to have additional programs in place to assist folks with that. And we also have our crisis, it's what's it called, our mobile crisis team that will go out and assist people through our crisis center. So we've got a lot of different programs in Montgomery County to assist people with their various needs.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Maureen, about that exit and entry delay. That seems to be a big one. Sometimes you've got folks that, you know, become wheelchair bound and they can't reach the panel. So the panel needs to be reconfigured. And, you know, a lot of times they're not very proud to say that they need help. You know, and I know when my grandparents got older, they were a little bit bitter about it. So it's recognizing and treating them with dignity and respect that they, you know, are at a place in their life where it's difficult for them. So just making sure that you're having compassion and kindness for them and just getting them the right help that they need, I think will help you in turn reduce the problem.
So also, hopefully there would be family on the contact list that the alarm company has. So you might be able to reach out to family and get some resolution that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sometimes we have to get adult protective services involved if they don't have anybody close enough.
Yeah.
Sherry, how are you on the comments? Oh.
They're just going back and forth, just talking about the different programs that other people have. For instance, in Canada, in Regina, they have something called a DVERS alarms for domestic violence, and they also have a cell arm program for victims that are given a call phone. They don't deal too much with Alzheimer's, but they would put a ping or something or a note in CAD if something were to come up. And that's about it, just going back and forth, different situations.
And we had an autistic kid here that kept running away, and he was very, very good at hiding. And we ended up working with, I want to say it was T-Mobile, something like that. And they had a very good solution to giving him a pad, it was like an iPad or something that he couldn't live without. And he took it everywhere, and that it had the tracking device on it. So that's why we were able to kind of track him when he would go on his, you know, episodes. So
yeah, it is really a sad situation. I was typing in the chat room. We had a citizen, an elderly person, who their family members just wouldn't deal with them anymore. And they really used their panic button as a form of attention and to get people to respond and just to have human contact. So it is a real tricky situation and how to handle, you know, it's beyond just an accident and pressing the button. You know, there's mental issues at stake here.
right. And, you know, COVID-19 certainly has brought a lot of challenges, you know, with the mental health crisis right now. So if you're not aware of it, just be cognizant that, you know, it may pop up before the end of the year. Any other questions or comments or concerns about that question?
So we at the city of Kirkland do not charge false alarm fines for any of our residents that are 62 or older. So that's a given, like, because they're going to set off their alarms more often than not. But then we also do make notes on their permit, you know, if there is a mental health issue or if there's an Alzheimer's or a dementia issue, so that the officer is aware of that going in. But, and then we also consider it, in a sense, a way of checking up on them. If they set off their alarm, we can go in and have a quick sort of wellness check as well,
Mhm.
kind of combine.
That's a great point. Anybody else? All right. The next question is, maintenance staff set off the alarm in my apartment. Why charge me? Now, depending on what jurisdiction you are working in, there are different laws that govern, you know, how many hours the tenant needs to be given advance notice. Now, obviously, if the apartment is flooding with water and it's an emergency repair, that's a little bit different. But I've seen more than not landlords going into apartments where they clearly violated the tenant's rights and had no business going in there because it wasn't a true emergency. It was them trying to show the apartment and not give the notice, you know, in accordance with law here. So I would encourage you to double check and make sure that you are maybe familiar with where to find the landlord tenant disputes and what their rights are. I'm not suggesting that you get in the middle of it, but just be aware of what they are, and that way when the tenant calls, you know, they might be able to give that charge back to the landlord, or you might just make an appeal because it's the right thing to do. That, I mean, truly, if they didn't have permission to be in there and they just went in there to show the apartment, or, you know, they forgot that they had maintenance and they didn't, you know, a routine cleaning for, you know, the HVAC or whatever it could be, they just forgot to notify them. I mean, they are required to have advance notice whenever possible. So do you all run into that ever in your neck of the woods?
For us, we had a problem with a storage location that continuously would tell us that people are trespassing on their property, and they were not securing their gate in order to stop people from trespassing on the property, that they were accessing their storage units after hours. And we told them, you know, if you have an officer come out there and take a report for the trespassing and trespass the individual, we would be happy to reverse the charge for it. But they refused to do the action. And as far as we're concerned, if you're not going to do the legwork on it, then you can pay the fine.
I think Barbara knows who you're talking about, Maureen. Yeah, we run into
It's a safe
that.
space. It's a safe space.
Does anybody handle it differently?
Well, in my county, we kind of made an internal policy. We forewarned the maintenance staff, but they kept setting off alarms, and we gave them a warning, and we could clearly see in the CAD notes, but we gave them a warning that if it continues, that we will charge the alarm to them because they had their own alarm account. So that kind of helped make them care.
So if the apartment, the renter is concerned about maintenance staff entering, but they gave them a key to the unit, then we're kind of in that back to, if you give them a key, give them a code. And the alarm company can give the maintenance staff a separate code so they could know when people enter without setting off an alarm. They could be, and they could even be notified that they entered. So there are ways around this, the privacy concerns, without generating unnecessary alarms.
Yeah, I mean, and part of it is, you know, following their lease, which requires the tenant to notify the landlord that they're having an alarm system installed. Because sometimes that does happen where they just do it and they don't tell anybody, and it's illegal for you to change the locks yourself as a tenant here. So they wouldn't be able to do that. They would always have the key, but you know, they would know if they don't have that proper passcode, you know, then they didn't do what they were supposed to do. So it's kind of like a twofold issue, both where you could, you know, get into a civil dispute about whose fault it really is for not following contract law.
And for us, a lot of times if there's some kind of emergency, there was one business where it was during the winter time and they ended up having a burst pipe, and fire rescue had responded out there. But for whatever reason, there were no notes in our police event for it. So when I talked with the citizen and then I talked with the officer to confirm, yes, there was actually a burst pipe there, you know, we went ahead and waived it because maintenance was coming in regardless. So we do permit those types of things, as you know, that was beyond their control. But if it was something that wasn't beyond their control, you know, like they're cleaning people and a cleaning person has changed, and we'll just tell them, look, if you have a problem with your cleaning person, you need to either properly train them or get a new cleaning person. We have one location that's about to, our fines get up to $4,000 per activation for commercial accounts. And we have one location that's getting ready to jump into that, and it's their cleaning people that keep doing it. And I've called them multiple times and it continues to happen.
All right, moving along. I don't see anything else currently. Pulling the old Home Alone, where Kevin wants to be away from his family, but he was alone by himself and scared and wanted the police to respond. I've seen this happen more than not. They're upstairs in the master, they bunkered in the bathroom because the door contact was rattled, maybe perhaps because of the wind. How do you all handle this in your jurisdictions? Here they're getting charged.
Wow, Meredith, I guess I'm a little bit soft when I read these notes in CAD. I don't see it that often, but I'll really read the notes in CAD. And I kind of treat it like the, I forget who spoke earlier about the reasonableness. The person looks very frightened and scared. I mean, the notes are saying they're afraid, they're up and, you know, they're a single mother and they're locked in the bedroom with their 2 children. If the notes state that, I do waive it because I look at it as they would otherwise call 911 for dispatch. So if it's reasonable, I do waive those.
During a storm where it's clearly the wind that is the fault. In this case, that was my example in this case.
Oh, okay. No. I think I would be a little bit more strict with that.
That's the only time I've ever really seen it, is it's during a storm. I don't think I've ever had anybody call because their alarm just went off when they were at home. Most of the time they're not at home or they're asleep. Those are the only 2 ones, but I do see it quite a bit when there are storms. Now, if it's a hurricane, that's a little bit different, like when we had Sandy come through a couple years ago, but it's kind of interesting to see some of the notes, like you said, but I guess I don't understand if it's only one thing and you know if someone's getting in your house and you have a good system, you're probably going to have more than one thing tripped. You're probably going to hear something that's going to indicate, you know, what's going on. And if you don't really know what's going on and you don't know where they're at, then how are you going to help the officer go to the location that would be most helpful? You know, I get like that you might be concerned, but it seems like a lot, they don't know anything about what's going on. They just know that they're scared during the storm. I don't get it. Maybe I'm heartless. I don't know. Anybody else have anything similar happen like that in their jurisdiction? All right.
Yeah. Leslie Johnson, they handle them like virtual 911 calls since they were afraid. So I guess they're a little bit lenient. Sherry Cooey, she says she charges them.
It's only dispatching if there are multiple trips. Yeah. And in my case during a storm, there could be a delay, because call centers are, they're getting an influx of calls depending on the weather systems that are going through. So that could factor into it as well. But I am a big advocate on officer safety, and I don't like, that sending them in blindly to a situation and then just not having any information about where you think that they might be. That's what kind of concerns me a little bit. All right. Commercial location like a convenience or liquor store or fast food. There are two people in the establishment that are arguing. A customer became belligerent or the person was suspicious. So we just pushed the panic button. Why are we being charged for the alarm? And I have also had one where a person became belligerent in a convenience store and they picked up a bag of chips, a small bag, might I add, and threw them on the ground and started cussing. And they did, in turn, push the panic button. And that just requires education. That's when you educate them and say you should only ever push the panic button if you really felt like your life was in danger. If someone's arguing and you didn't see a weapon, I mean, that's debatable. And also, I think that people learn through trials and tribulation that it's actually faster. When in doubt, if your life is in danger, you should be using 911 whenever you can. That's the fastest way to help. Those questions get answered, the dispatcher can triage and try to help you. You pushing a panic button, it alerts the authorities, but it doesn't really help that responding officer. And in this case, we're running code, and it's being more than one officer that's going to your premise. So it's not as helpful as it is as if you physically can call 911 and your life, isn't in danger from doing so, then you should be doing that. And then here's the appropriate, times that you should be pushing the panic button, and educating them, and they're doing their deposits, especially when you see banks, that's our number one thing of misuse and panic alarms. So I don't know if you guys have had anything similar. That's one of the more intricate questions that have come up. And then do you charge?
Recently, we had a location that daily was hitting their panic button because they were either starting to get overcapacity with people and people wouldn't listen to them, or they were getting into arguments with customers coming in. And I did not charge them for it, but like you said, I used it as a moment of education, and I sent them a bulletin from FARA on when it's appropriate to use the panic and hold up buttons, and what their true purpose was. And like you said, that calling 911 is the most appropriate avenue. If you feel that your life is in danger, you're not the only one there. Other people are monitoring the situation, and you should train your staff, that you're the backup for me. If you see something going on, you see it, you say something. So you need to call 911, and you need to be the eyes and ears. You need to provide that lookout. What if that situation turns sideways and the person pulls out a knife and stabs you and takes off? Well, at least your backup person who was calling 911 already provided a description. You're not going to get that from a panic or hold up button. So I think really, honestly, the calling 911 17 years of being in the business of 911 is the most vital way of handling the situation. So thank you.
In the chat, we have an interesting situation where apparently a restaurant manager actually told their employees to use the panic button every time they could because it would be faster, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. It truly is. And this also needs to happen when new employees are brought in to that establishment. I encourage those businesses to have some kind of employee expectation or SOP where they're walked through on how to properly use it, to include scenarios of what would be best practice, and then having them sign off on it so that they understand the expectation, because it's my pet peeve. I mean, the officers are running code. They're running lights and sirens to the establishment because it is a holdup or a panic or robbery alarm, however you want to label it. And, you know, we still have a few of officers that are killed annually because they're running to these alarms that are false and they shouldn't be running code. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for them, and it's dangerous for the people that are on the road. So it is their responsibility to use it properly and appropriately. This is one of my favorite situations of all time here. We had an establishment down here. It was an art gallery, and the door was open because they didn't lock it, and somebody managed to open it, and then they went in before the responding officer and touched everything. Nothing was stolen in this case, but they contaminated the crime scene. Well, why can't you pull the prints, ma'am? This is a crime scene. They violated my office space here. You know, this is an art gallery. It's like, but you just ruined the crime scene. And it's like they watch the shows on TV. They know what's going to happen, and then they just went in there and destroyed any evidence that we could have possibly had, because the person was there for quite a bit. So again, it's explaining to them what actually happens on a call for service. You know, I even encourage people to go on a ride along so they can really understand and appreciate what these officers are asked to do on a daily basis. And, you know, why they can't pull prints down, because they went through and touched everything and shut the door and locked the door without using gloves. So, you know, everything would be contaminated at that point. So, and it's clearly on camera that they never locked the door either. So it goes back to the onus of encouraging responsible use of the system and ensuring that all windows and doors are properly fitted and making sure that you're locking the damn door. So I'm sure that you guys have had similar situations in your neck of the woods. Anybody have anything that they want to comment on that, or you guys would just move on to the next question?
In the chat, some jurisdictions, they give a one-time allowance for open doors. And if it happens again with no evidence of a crime, then they charge. So they're a little bit lenient.
For us, if we find an open door, we're never charging unless we found a reason, like a cleaning person or, you know, a pet sitter or something like that, because we're going to give the benefit of the doubt that it's possible that someone could have broken in.
Yeah, and most of the establishments down here have the no trespassing signage clearly posted and conspicuously posted, so that kind of covers them in that regard too. So a police report gets filed, and we don't charge for that either. I'm surprised at how many times I've gotten this next question. The officer never showed up. Why are you still charging me with a false alarm? People need educated on what a call for service record is, and that it's an admissible record, for court. It's a legal document, and depending on, we ask for open and closing times of establishments, and they're looking for signs of business as usual. And, I always point them to the little line that they sign at the bottom of the registration form where that we're not entering a contract with any of these alarm users, that it's based on priority calls, it's based upon availability. And let's face it, everyone is doing more with less. There's a lot of police cuts that are happening across the nation right now. And, this makes it ever more important to make sure that people are using their systems properly and appropriately. So I do go back to the officer and I get confirmation with the date and the time of arrival, the time of the dispatch being cleared, and any specific notes that they might have needed to add, or I can't see in the other part of the CAD system, just to keep that on record, and I add that into the CRYWolf notes. So that's what I do here. Does anybody do anything differently?
Meredith, I don't really do anything differently. I mean, I go back and check on-scene times and check with the officers, and I get the CAD notes as well. I have CRYWolf also. But one thing I have found that's been very helpful for me is making sure the officers have good training on the ordinance. I do an actual orientation class in our VLET, and where I introduce them to the ordinance, make sure they're aware of it. And then I give them some tips on taking good notes, why they're important, the importance of making sure they have their on-scene time checked in on the reports, and how that can affect appeal hearings and even their credibility when responding to these calls. And ever since I started doing that, I have very little arguments when it comes to this particular question.
Yeah, similarly. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
So what we do is, if the officer does not check on scene, we don't charge. Because a lot of times what happens is somebody will respond with proper code. But if the officer doesn't check on scene, there's no charge. That's just how we handle it.
Yeah, similar to Tim, we also don't charge if there's no on-scene time. Even if the officer's notes indicate that they went on scene. 2 years ago, I went around with Alberto and we did approximately 33 roll call trainings over the span of 4 to 6 weeks while I was 9 months pregnant with my son. So hurrying things along. But the number of problems that we were having with officers misspeaking about our program, whether they would tell a user, oh, I'll put a clearance in so you won't be charged. No, I'm going to change that clearance because that's not the correct clearance. If you've gone to an alarm and you've put notes in there saying it's an alarm malfunction, or the user error, and clearing it something else so they don't get charged. We told them the importance of them going on scene. Because we're not charging the alarms, you're going to continue to go out there day in and day out for the same problem over and over again. And there's no mechanism of compliance, because let's be honest, when it comes down to money, that's the mechanism of compliance. And the officers are not going to gain that and stop responding to calls. They're going to continuously waste their time. I told the officers, look, I am your advocate. Email me. I'm the only person that's sitting here charging these alarms, and I can only call so many places in a day. But if you're the squeakiest wheel, you will get the oil, and I will go and talk to the individuals and call them and say, look, we need to partner with your alarm company. I will copy alarm companies on correspondence and say, look, there's one location in our jurisdiction that we haven't charged them for every alarm, because either the officers have stopped responding due to the excessive number of alarms, but they've had 54 alarms so far this year that have been reported. And at that point, they would be, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole for all of those alarms, and they're currently in denied response, and it's a state government entity. But you know, it is what it is. We don't care who you are. You don't pay your fines. You don't get service, and you don't take responsibility in correcting your issues. Officers aren't coming out. The one location that would leave their doors open with all of their fleet keys available for all of their vehicles, and their establishment was so large that it took the entire midnight shift of that district to respond out to protect the location, which is a huge waste of resources to pull everybody down to one area. And then when stuff starts to pop off, you've got people running code across the county, and they're going to end up getting into an accident for unnecessary alarm. So really reaching out and dealing with those site managers and the alarm companies have been helpful in resolving those issues.
Awesome, that's some good information, Maureen. Anybody else have anything before we move along? We're almost to our 3:30 mark, which is where we were gonna break before Sherry starts her next presentation. I just wanna make sure that everyone's okay with going over a few minutes while we get through these questions. We good for like 5 more minutes? We can get through these? All right, so I self-monitor my own site. Why am I being charged for police dispatch when I never knew there was a security bylaw in the first place? And Brad nailed it with this little quote. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of laws that you may or may not know where you live. That doesn't mean that you don't have to follow them. And, you know, that's just pointing them to the direction where transparency is key right now for government. You should have all of your laws and bylaws on your city or county or state website, wherever you are, so that you can direct them there and they can Google and look up any specific code that their heart desires. Also, if your ordinance, you know, alarm.com does a lot of nice things, and maybe trying to get the word out to places like them for the people that do self-manage. I mean, it's a long shot, but just educating the person on the players that are involved so that they can understand the process and how it works. I am a senior and I am on a limited income. I cannot afford this bill or any other situation, single parent, loss of job, etc. Everyone has life happening. Everyone has hardships. Everyone has special circumstances according to them, I'm sure. So I am a big advocate on putting people on a payment plan if you can. And especially with COVID right now, it's required of our jurisdiction to work with people during the state of emergency. We have a lot of businesses downtown that were hit pretty hard initially, not being able to be opened. So what we did when COVID first hit, we set out a press release of all of the proactive things that we're doing. And I changed the cover letter of my cover for my notices that were going out to let them know things that they needed to do. You know, things like we were increasing our patrol checks and we're encouraging asset protection and making sure everyone is safe, you know, while they couldn't be at their businesses, mainly for the people that had the systems, because some of them had no choice but to turn off the system because they couldn't afford to do all of the things that they were doing before without having any income. So it is important that you educate yourself on what's going on in your community, being part of the community policing module and mission that's very important to your department wherever you work, and kind of helping those citizens into a situation where you're not causing more anxiety. I mean, you have a fine line where you're enforcement of the ordinance and then you're collecting the fees, and then you're also a human being too. So it's kind of balancing all those things and making the best decision for your program and helping the person as well. as best as you can. That's my food for thought. Does anyone have anything different? Or they're just like, nope, I'm not doing that. I think we got some chatter going on in the chat room. Sherry?
Yeah, of course, offering payment plans, also alarm schools. They can take a class and waive a false alarm or fine,
Good one.
which is a good idea if your jurisdiction offers alarm schools.
Excellent. All right, moving on into permits. This happens a lot in my jurisdiction because the onus is on the user. Why do I have to get a permit? My alarm company didn't tell me I had to get a permit. Shouldn't the alarm company have to get the permit if they put in the system? Well, it depends on how your ordinance is written. There are plenty of jurisdictions where they require the alarm company to obtain the permit on behalf of the customer. And there are some people that put the onus on the alarm user. There is no right or wrong answer there. It's what's best for your jurisdiction. But unfortunately, one of the downfalls is not having that in your ordinance is that you're not able to get the customer lists from the alarm companies, which means that you don't know everyone in your jurisdiction until they probably have a false alarm, or they somehow come upon a press release of where you're talking about the program, or you're doing a crime tip on some things, and that's how you get the word out. But it is a downfall of not having it in there. But of course, the alarm company, some of them are burdened by having to figure out what's going on in all of the different jurisdictions, and it can become cumbersome. One of the things that we have in the chapter in the Mid-Atlantic area is that we have a matrix, and by the alarm companies joining the chapter, they have access to all of the information of who's in charge of the jurisdiction and what their requirements are. So it's a helpful tool that we can advertise, and we find it to be valuable. Anybody else have anything to weigh in? Registration fees. Yep, that is another a tool. It's one of the things that when I got CryWolf, we have registration and renewal, and we don't charge for either of them. So it's kind of, there's no incentive for people to do it unless they've gotten fined in the past, which sometimes is enough incentive in itself. It really just depends on what's best for your jurisdiction. Well, let's say we've got some requirement. Sherry, what does that say?
Sorry, I was typing back. That their bylaw, the onus is on the alarm company to register the alarm accounts before the system begins monitoring. So it just all depends on how the ordinance is written. We're all different.
It does have
in Montgomery County.
The alarm company already has their book of business and their contacts that they could readily give us. And one of the things that you could do with CryWolf, if you're not aware, is you can do an import of a customer list. Rick Moore can help you with that if you do have CryWolf. It's one of the great features about it, in my opinion. All right, I've canceled with my old alarm company a number of times, but they won't cancel my permit with you because I refuse to pay them out the remainder of my contract. Can you either contact them or just remove my permit?
So in Montgomery County, we don't cancel a user just because an alarm company says that they don't have service anymore. Anyway, it has to come from the user. So if they send us an email and tell us that they've canceled their service, we'll shut their service off, or we'll cancel their account. So the alarm company really, what we do with them is if they tell us that they no longer have this customer, we'll just remove them from their portfolio, but we don't close the account because obviously the person can go to another company. So we wait until we get something from the user.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what we do here as well. Does
Definitely
anybody?
here too, because 9 times out of 10, they're already with the new company.
Yep. And a lot of times I don't even, that's not even on my radar unless I do get notice from the company that they have, and it's more so that they've terminated the service and it's not the other way around. Or I get a new registration with that same address and it flags it in my system as being a duplicate. One of the downfalls from, if you're not aware of, say you have different names that come up in the CAD report, I don't know about you, but here we have a real property search that you can go and verify according to the state real property department, through taxation. But sometimes, depending on the type of loan that you have, they won't be able to update. Say someone's they're going to lease out their property, they own it, and they're not going to change their actual mailing address because it'll actually violate the terms and conditions of their loan. So they don't do that. I run into that problem a lot, not so much with false alarms, but my other program that I manage here through the excessive use. But it does happen more than not. And that goes back to like the housing boom and then the crash. And, they're just not allowed to rent their property in accordance with the FHA or USDA loan that they acquired. Anything else on that before we move into our last slide? So permitting is kind of fun. So I'm the homeowner and you're telling me that I can't cancel my own permit. I haven't had this personally happen. This is one of the questions submitted because we do accept it from the user. Does someone else have a more elaboration on this question and where they were going with it?
I'm not sure where the question came from, but my situation I have that I think relates to this question is I have an alarm user, many of them, who no longer use their system, but the system's still active and the alarm company refuses to not dispatch anymore. And their frustration is, I don't want to use this system. I can't get out of my contract, but the alarm company still insists on calling the police. So it's another sticky situation where we're trying to be pulled in the middle. But I'm not sure if this question is relating to that.
It could also be if you buy a home where there was a previously installed system, like a lot of the new builds come pre-made with an alarm system. And depending on whether or not that first homeowner activated it or not, people don't realize that will still sound if people try to mess with it. And we have a time limit on the audible noise the system can make, because we've had that happen where someone accidentally does it and then they can't get the thing turned off. So that's also a problem that we sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes we run into here. Any other elaboration or questions about that one? All right, well, moving into our last question, why do I have to pay the renewal fee if I've never had a false alarm? And that is That's a great question. I would advise to the customer. But, you know, to be fair, if you have policies and procedures in place for everyone and everyone's doing it, then that's just what is required of you as a citizen in that municipality. And I would remind them that you're not the one that probably created the ordinance, and educate them on how the laws are made and direct them to some of the workshops that the mayor and aldermen or wherever you are going to, so they can, you know, have a voice if they feel they would like to change something about it.
In Montgomery County, we welcome, you know, if they, a lot of times we'll get questions on something that's law related, and then they'll not like the answer that they get from us. And, you know, they start making what we like to call threats about going to the county executive or whatever. And we tell them, you know, by all means, you know, go to them, voice your concerns, start a petition, whatever it is you want to do, that's fine. We're not going to tell them they can't, but we know we reference the law, and there's no stipulation for someone who doesn't have a false alarm getting anything free. So it's, we just kind of reference back to the law.
All right, sorry, I got sidetracked. Our mandatory matching face masks just came in today for our department, so I will be able to wear an actual cloth mask and not those surgical masks. Pretty excited about it. Sherry, do we have any questions in the chat about any of those last ones?
We have one comment from Jordan, which is so funny. Do you still have to make your car payment if you didn't drive your car this month? I would love to give that answer to people.
Touche. Touche, Jordan. Do any of you have any specific questions that we haven't addressed that you are really wanting to know how you deal with a certain problem or scenario that's really wreaking havoc in your neck of the woods? Nobody has any questions? Are you all still awake?
Apparently, you're going to have to pass out your energy drinks on the next session.
Yeah, I should find some. I don't have appropriate music to play, but I could probably find a song or two that's edited. All right. Well,
Tess says, we're all here. You're just that good, Meredith.
why?
You covered all our questions.
Yeah, I will admit, public speaking is, I mean, I've definitely gotten better at it over the years. It's still something that is a little nerve-wracking at times, and I encourage you, if you haven't done a class or gotten in front of your mayor and board, or even a group of homeowners at we have neighborhood advisory councils here. It's really important, you know, that you feel comfortable about being a subject matter expert in this. And, you know, that's why these questions are so diverse, because you never know what kind of questions are going to be thrown at you. And like I said at the beginning of this, we're all tasked with doing a lot of various responsibilities aside from alarm management, more so than probably you knew that when you signed up for the job. So I'm an advocate. You're never too old to learn. So just keep educating yourself about the industry, what new products are coming out, you know, making sure that your customers can approach you and they know how to get a hold of you, you know, while you're teleworking or whatever your situation is, so they can get the problem solved before they become, you know, nuisances. Because we do want to advocate for the officers and keep them doing the community policing things that they need to be doing, especially now with everything going on. So I really appreciate everyone joining the webinar today, and I hope that you gathered some great information. And if you have specific questions and you're interested in contributing, the Training and Communications Committee would love to have you. So
Yes.
Sherry, when's the next meeting?
You would ask me that, because we're combining with symposium. I believe it's the 14th, this Thursday.
Yeah, I think it is this Thursday.
Yeah, this Thursday, because we're helping them with the virtual training. So we're going to be combined with symposium for a while. We may fluctuate those meetings. Typically, we would meet the third Thursday every 2 months. But right now, while we're helping with the virtual training, we're meeting with on the symposium schedule. And I believe there's a second Thursday of the month, so, or as needed. But yeah, feel free to contact me if you're interested.